بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I welcome you to another episode of our series As-Safaratul Kiram, where we strive to be in the company of the holy angels by perfecting our recitation of the Quran. I am your host, Abu Ammar Yasir Qadhi. Now, many people don't know that the Quran was originally written in a very, very ancient script. A script which the majority of Muslims of our times would actually find it impossible to read. Not only was the actual script different, there were also no diacritical marks, we call them tashkil, no fathas, kasras and dhammas. Also there were no dots to differentiate between the ba and the ya and the ta. All of these letters were written without a dot. And the way that the Arabs would tell the difference between the letters would be by context. So the question arises, when did these additions occur in the Quran? And the answer is that very, very early along, in the 1st century of the Hijrah. There was a famous scholar by the name of Abul Aswad ad-Du'ali, who died in the year 69 Hijrah. And he was the first person to add a primitive version of the tashkil marks. What he would do was that when there was a dhamma, he would add a dot after the letter. And when there was a fatha, he would add a dot above the letter. And when there was a kasra, he would add a dot beneath the letter. This was the primitive version of the tashkil. And in fact, if you look at many of the Qurans of the first 2 centuries, you will find this primitive version of tashkil still employed. And he was reacting to a problem that had arisen, and that was that a lot of non-Arabs had accepted Islam. Therefore, when they tried to recite the Quran, they found a lot of difficulty and they would make grammatical mistakes. So Abu Aswad al-Du'ali then added this primitive version of tashkil until it evolved eventually at the hands of Khalil ibn Ahmad, the famous scholar of the Arabic language, who died in the year 179 Hijrah. Khalil ibn Ahmad was the first one to actually make the tashkil as we know them today. A straight line above the letter for a fatha, a straight line below the letter for a kasra, and a, if you like, elongated waw for the dhamma. We go back to Abu Aswad al-Du'ali, and we say his 2 students then devised a system for differentiating the ya from the ba, from the ta, from the tha, and the qaf from the kaf, and so on and so forth. So his 2 students by the name of Yahya ibn Ya'mar and Nasr ibn Asim. These were his 2 students, Abu al-Aswad students, who first devised the dotted Arabic alphabet. Before their time, the Arabic alphabet had no dots in it. So these 2 students, and they died in the later part of the 1st century of the Hijrah, they were the first ones to write the Quran with the dots for the letters. So basically, within the first 80 years of the Hijrah, barely 70 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, the Quran was in a very, very similar form to what we find today. Returning to our topic of Tajweed, we were talking about the elongation of the vowel letters, or the rules of the mad. And we're now on the 3rd episode of our series regarding the rules of the mad. And in today's episode we will discuss 2 other types of mad. Al-mad al-arid lis-sukun and al-mad al-lin. Don't worry about the Arabic terms. The only reason we're mentioning the Arabic terms in this lesson is so that you can corroborate what I am teaching with what is found in most of the books of Tajweed. What is important is to understand the rule and not to memorize the name of the rule. We move on to the first type, and that is basically both of these deal with a sukun after the mad. This is something we have not covered before. What happens when a sukun occurs after the mad? Well, there's a number of ways that sukun can occur. The first way is due to a voluntary stop. And this is the meaning of arid lis-sukun. It means that the letter has been exposed to a sukun. In other words, the sukun, the silent sound, is not there. If you open up the Quran, it's not there. But you ran out of breath, or the verse ended and you wanted to stop. So you put a sukun there. This is the meaning of arid lis-sukun. So it is a voluntary stop. It is a sukun that is not written in the text. But you, because you stopped there for whatever reason, if you ran out of breath, or if you stopped at the end of a verse, because you're supposed to stop at the end of every verse. So when you stop at the end of a verse, and there is no sukun there, you put the sukun there, this is called arid lis-sukun, and it's a voluntary stop. And the ruling is, once again, you have an option. You have a choice. 2, 4, or 5 harakas, you have the absolute option. However, once again, consistency. What do I mean by consistency? Who can tell me? What is the meaning of consistency?
If you choose any harakas, you must...
Exactly. If you choose a particular number at the beginning of your recitation, you must always remain with that number in that particular recitation. So let us look at any verse, the first few verses of the Qur'an. Suppose, this is Surah Al-Fatiha, the first 3 verses. Suppose I did not stop. How would this be recited? You would say, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. Notice I didn't stop after Alameen, even though there is a end of a verse there. Okay. So in reality, there is no sukoon on the noon. Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahmanir Rahim. But suppose I were to stop, as I should stop. It's encouraged to stop at the end of a verse. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. This is added lis-sukoon. And in this case, I use 2 harakas. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. 2 harakas. But I have the option of doing it 4. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And then I have the option of doing it 5. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. There's 5. But whatever I chose here, I should be consistent wherever I stop in the next part. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim and Maliki Yawmiddin. So suppose I chose over here 4. By the time I get to the end of this verse, I should also choose 4. And then when I get to the end of the 3rd verse, I should also choose 4. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahmanir Rahim Maliki Yawmiddin. 4, 4, 4. This is consistency. If I'm not consistent, if I'm inconsistent, then this is a mistake of tajweed. Okay? So to repeat, a very simple rule. When you put a sukoon where there is no sukoon, you put it there because you stop. Then you have the option of doing it 2 or 4 or 5 harakas. It is up to you. But once you have chosen what you want, you should be consistent in that. This is known as aarid lis-sukoon, meaning that you have exposed it to a sukoon. It is not there in and of itself. You are the one that has placed the sukoon there. Simple enough rule. I don't think there's any confusion in that. Let's move on to the second type of sukoon after a letter of the mad. This is technically not a letter of the mad, but the scholars have included it here. This is when a sukoon occurs after a silent ya or waw, which is preceded by a fatha. Now that sounds very complicated. When you see the examples, you understand. Basically, you have a sukoon after a ya, which has a silent letter on it, a silent sound on it, has a sukoon on it. And the ya is preceded by, or a waw, excuse me, ya or waw. The ya or waw is preceded by a fatha. Now, for it to be a letter of mad, the ya must be preceded by what? A kasra. And the waw must be preceded by a dhamma. So this is not technically precisely a letter of the mad, but the scholars have included it because the sound will be a mad. This is called al-mad al-leen, or if you like, the easygoing mad. When you look at the examples, you'll understand. For example, the word shay'. Okay? The word shay', you have over here, we put a sukoon there on the hamza. The ya already has a sukoon. Before the ya, there is a fatha. Okay? Likewise, al-bayt, the house. The ya has a sukoon on it. We stopped there on the ta, so we put the sukoon there. Before the ya, once again, there is a fatha. Here we have the option, if we stop there, of 2, 4, or 5. Once again, we have to stop on the ta. If you don't stop, or on the hamza, whatever the letter is. If you don't stop, you move on, there is no sukoon, there is no mad. So for example, al-bayt, suppose I did a mad of 2, al-bayt, 2. 4, al-bayt. And then 5, al-bayt. Okay, so we have 2, 4, or 5. We have the option. And once again, as usual, consistency. Once you choose one, every time you reach this type of mad, you should be consistent in what you recite. An example with the waw is as-saw. Notice that this is not as-su. Had it been as-su, what type of mad would that be?
Natural. Connected mad.
That would be a connected mad. A connected mad. Okay? Had that been as-su, does the sin had a dhamma, and both of these words occur in the Quran. You have as-su with a dhamma on the sin, and you have as-saw with a fatha on the sin. When there's a dhamma on the sin, then it becomes a connected mad, al-mad al-muttasil. In this case, you have to do how long? 4 or 5. You have to make it long. However, when there is a fatha, then this is not technically a letter of the mad. Therefore, you have the option of 2, 4, or 5. Let me now recite Surah Al-Quraysh, and you listen along with me. Just listen, and we will try to see where we have these mudud occurring. The Ila fi Quraysh, of course, is Surah number 106. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Okay, at the end of أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, what type of mad is this? It is this type of mad, the voluntary stop or the عارض للسكون. And I made it 4 harakas long. Okay, therefore when I finished أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم with 4 harakas, when I came to Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, which is also عدد السكون, I also had to do 4 harakas. Were I to do 2 harakas in the أعوذ بالله, then I'd have to do 2 in the Bismillah. لإيلاف قريش. Okay, لإيلاف. What type of mad is in the E over here? Who can remember? This is a previous episode we did it.
Substitution.
This is the substitution where we have a harf of mad before it is a hamza. Okay, and the ruling is that it is 2. Li'ilaf. What type of mad is in laf? Natural mad. 2 harakas again. Here we have Quraysh. This is what type of mad? This is Madullin. This is Madullin. This is what we have just done now. Wasukun after a silent ya or waw preceded by a fatha. Look at Quraysh. You have the ya which is silent, and you have before it is a fatha. So I did it in this case 5 harakas. Once I've chosen 5 for this, I need to be consistent anytime it occurs. لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ إِيلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ. What type is shita?
Connected.
It is a mad al-muttasil, a connected mad. So I have to do it 4 or 5. I have no choice of making it small to 2 harakas. فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Once again, in the صَيْف and the bayt, both of them are مَدِّلِّين. الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. Okay, الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم. What type of mad is that?
Separated.
It is a separated mad, al-mad al-munfasil. So we have the option of doing it 2, 4, or 5. We have a ya preceded by a kasra, which makes it a letter of the mad. This is then followed by a hamza, but in a different word. And this makes it a separated mad, which means we have the option of doing it 2, 4, or 5. أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ. What did we do with the firstly? Let's go to أَطْعَمَهُم. We have a silent meme followed by another meme. What is the ruling here? Idgham shafawi. Idgham shafawi. Min ju'. What do we do there? Ikhfa. We have a silent noon followed by a jim. Ju'u. What is the ruling here? We have a tanween. We have a tanween followed by a waw, so it will be idgham with ghunna. وآمنهم. Once again we have idgham shafawi. Min khawf. What is the ruling of the noon here? Idhar. And then we have khawf, which is a Madullin. Okay, so we have then talked today about 2 types of mad. The first is the mad due to a voluntary stop, عارض السكون, and in this case we have the option of 2, 4, or 5. And the second is a sukun, which is preceded by a silent ya or waw before it is a fatha. Once again we have the option of 2, 4, or 5 harakas. With this we come to the conclusion of today's episode. I hope to see you next time. Until then, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.